As the 13th anniversary of the attacks of September the 11th, 2001 nears, attempts to learn the full facts continue. One of those attempts comes in the form of a play being held in London, which explores the many unanswered questions surrounding that day. The play, which focuses on Building 7 at the World Trade Center, is called 7 Seconds and features former MI5 agent David Shayler, who in the 1990s blew the lid on British intelligence service attempts to use al-Qaeda-linked militants to assassinate former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi.
We've got to expose the truth about 9/11. We need to take this fight to the public in a different way, using things like dramas, but any other kind of things we can do, any other kind of publicity stunts we can do to get people to look at the evidence for themselves. Because university, when they do, they come to the conclusion it's an inside job, unless they work in the mainstream media.
The play centres around the actual statements of real journalists who are played by actors, and one of the characters is Press TV's very own Susan Madaris.
I think Press TV have done an excellent job. In the play, we mention a very good Press TV journalist, Susan Madaris, and her interview with Dr. Alan Zabrowski of the U.S. Army War College. Yes, I think Press TV are perhaps almost alone in their fight to get the truth out.
This is World Trade Center 7.
The attacks of 9/11 continue to raise many questions in the minds of not just ordinary people, but hundreds of engineers and architects who say the official story is simply untenable. The organisers of this play say that it doesn't mark the end of their efforts, but simply the beginning.
Hi there, I'm Darren Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
You're tuned into Video Radio, independent media
For an intelligent world.
And today, we've actually got our act together. And we're starting to talk about cracks in the system, the way that activism is winning, fascism is losing, and the truth is coming out about 9/11.
And last week was the 13th anniversary of the 9/11 mass attack on America. And now there's a stage play out in London that is actually challenging people to rethink 9/11.
And of course, you have to get on AndE911.org. It's architects and engineers for 9/11 truth, for the actual physics on why the official story is just a loaded hooey.
Everybody that takes a serious look at it can quickly come to that conclusion.
And this week, I discovered that Ed Asner is one of the people who are demanding truth out of the government. We're going to have film on that later, but right now,
there's some trouble afoot in Israel. Apparently members of the elite 8200 division of the intelligence division are refusing service in the force because of the treatment of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank.
YouTube and the ability to bring media out of the war zone is really what's changing people's views on these actions. So check this out.
A group of former Israeli soldiers and reservists from the nation's military intelligence division are protesting the group's treatment of Palestinian civilians. More than 40 former members of Israel's Unit 8200 have signed a letter to the commanding officer and to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, refusing to serve in the future.
They're speaking out against the methods the military uses to obtain information on Palestinian civilians.
The group's letter, published here in the New York Times, highlights a disillusionment with a lack of oversight in Unit 8200, which functions much like the U.S. National Security Agency. It objects to what they describe as blackmail, harassment, and extortion of Palestinians. The Times points out other such instances of protest. In 2003, 13 members of Israel's special forces refused missions into occupied territories. That same year, Israeli pilots refused to participate in airstrikes they considered targeted assassinations. But this week's letter marks the first such protest by intelligence officers. Some of the soldiers who signed the letter talked to The Guardian. One says Unit 8200's actions go too far beyond self-defense. The soldiers told The Guardian the timing of their message wasn't motivated by the recent conflict in Gaza. They say the idea had been gaining steam for months beforehand. All the same, reactions came quickly from both sides of the issue. The Times of Israel says a spokesperson for the Palestinian Authority hailed the move as an ethical step. Israeli officials condemned the letter and are calling for the dismissal of those who signed it. At the same time, BBC reports Israel's former intelligence chief downplayed the significance of the letter, calling its writers a fringe percentage of Unit 8200. For Newsy, I'm Micah Sargent.
So, wow.
Yeah, that really is a crack in the system. People are starting to pay attention. Even Ted Forbes at a recent Christians conference was booed off stage when he started talking about how they were there for Israel. He completely changed the subject and he made a total fool of himself, but that's nothing new for Mr. Cruz.
I'm glad we deported him. Now, okay, news that you haven't heard, cracks in the system. Everyone says this capitalism thing works, but it doesn't, especially when you start taking a look at the food system.
And especially when a publication like Forbes magazine comes out with a study predicting where the next food riots will occur, and of course that would be the United States.
It started in Greece, it ended up in Tunisia and Egypt with a $20 loaf of bread, and you better believe it's coming here.
Check it out.
According to Forbes, the price of food in the U.S. has spiked to its highest rate in 3 years. People are now paying much more for staples like meat, eggs, coffee, butter, you name it, it costs more. Recent droughts are partly to blame for the rising prices, but the FDA's latest round of food regulations can also share the blame because they're a total circle of dumb. First, we've got this capitalist system that encourages corporations to make really unhealthy, cheap food to maximize profits for investors. So our food makers make crap food. Then we all get fat. Then the government studies why we're all fat and comes up with regulations like food makers need to reduce the amount of sodium in their products. Yeah, you need to watch your salt intake, but forcing Hamburger Helper to reformulate their box of barf isn't going to solve our obesity crisis. It's just going to drive up the cost of Hamburger Helper, as it offsets the cost of complying with regulations. And in turn, Hamburger Helper is going to contain even crappier ingredients. And thus, the circle of regulatory dumb is completed. Another factor in rising food costs is the U.S. deregulation of commodities markets. That's according to a study from the New England Complex Systems Institute in Cambridge. And it's that study that makes the direst of predictions for the U.S. Using plain, simple math and data charts, they've come to a clear-cut conclusion that when food prices rise as much as they have been in the U.S., then people start rioting, just as they already are in other parts of the world. See all that unrest in Ferguson that just happened? That's nothing compared to what can happen when millions of people really start feeling the effects of hunger. That's a level of civil unrest that our crap food system is only going to feed.
Okay, so food, riots.
It's not just food, it's the quality of the food as well that's really not good for people.
Quality of food? Man, we covered it in the other segment talking about ice cream bars that don't melt, and of course the various amounts of stuff that's in a McDonald's burger. Okay, medical marijuana.
Yes, in the war on drugs, they've decided that marijuana is a bad thing. But a recent studies come out that states that have medical marijuana have a 25% reduction in overdose deaths from opiates.
And of course, the leading gateway drug is not marijuana, and it's solving more problems than it's creating.
Check out this story from CNN.
My next headline is from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. States allowing medical marijuana report fewer prescription drug overdose deaths. Right now, 23 states and the District of Columbia have legalized the use of medical marijuana, and there may be an unintended benefit. A new study finds that the states that allow medical marijuana have 25% fewer prescription drug overdose deaths on average. Colleen Barry is a senior author of the study and an associate professor of health policy and management at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Barry. So I think we all know that opioid painkiller addiction is a big problem in this country, oftentimes can lead to heroin addiction. What is it that you wanted to find out?
So many individuals use prescription pain medications like OxyContin and Vicodin to address pain. And we were interested in looking at whether medical marijuana as an alternative for pain management might lead to a reduction in overdose deaths, since medical marijuana isn't subject to the same risks of unintentional overdose as these medications.
And what did you find?
We compiled death certificate data from the CDC, and we found that across all states, the rate of prescription pain medication overdose deaths has been increasing over our study period over the last 12 years. However, we found that the yearly rate of overdose death in states with medical marijuana laws, as you said, had about a 25% lower on average rate than in states without medical marijuana laws. And in absolute terms, this is pretty sizable. In 2010 alone, there were about 1,700 fewer overdose deaths in these states with medical marijuana laws than we would have anticipated based on trends before the laws were passed.
You remember the original headline, states allowing medical marijuana report fewer prescription drug overdose deaths? What I would have written, getting high keeps overdose deaths low.
Okay, so remember, marijuana is not a gateway drug, and that is a lie.
Yes, the title on that headline should be Getting High Keeps Overdoses Low.
Okay, so, yes, protesting and activism works.
It does, and a lot of people are questioning the president's reasoning behind the escalation of the war against ISIS.
Yes, you know, Iraq, Syria, they're just trying to ball them up into one religious ball that we should bomb and not start negotiating with.
But people actually have the internet and they can research these things, and they do tend to voice their opinions.
Oh, protests? Okay.
Activism is winning. Check out what happened in New York.
In Times Square, in the center of Midtown Manhattan, a group of peace activists gathered to denounce Obama's plan to launch airstrikes against Syria and Iraq. The protest included Syrian Americans, Iraqi Americans, peace activists, and trade unionists. The rally was called by the International Action Center. Among the protesters was Kaloun Makul, a Syrian American who says the U.S. should stay out of Syria.
It's another failure for Obama administration. I feel sorry. They failed first time. Now they falling again, and now they have the biggest mistake. Supporting terrorists, standing behind the country who support terrorists, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and how you're going to fight terrorists with people who supporting the terrorists.
Protesters said the money spent on U.S. militarism should instead be used to fund jobs, housing, education, and other societal needs. Law student Amit Gupta says U.S. intervention has not improved the lives of Iraqis, but only increased the level of suffering in the country.
They've destroyed at least a century's worth of development in Iraq that existed prior. They've institutionalized sectarian tensions that didn't even really exist. They've displaced 4 million people. They've killed possibly over 1 million people. In addition to the sanctions that were on Iraq, they've destabilized the entire country.
The protesters say they represent a large section of U.S. society that is opposed to further military intervention around the world. Caleb Maupin, Press TV, New York.
Okay.
Of course, one of the spin-offs from the war on terror has been the imprisonment of people in Guantanamo Bay.
So while people are standing up against war and start asking why are we acting so fascist and so ridiculous, there are people in the system that are standing up.
An Army nurse has risked his career because he refuses to participate in the torture of prisoners, which is known as force feeding, or what they call non-religious fasting.
Okay.
You gotta love the euphemisms.
Check it out.
Guess what? We actually have some good news. Guantanamo Bay, it's one of the biggest blights on America's history and our apparent record or wanting to be the freest nation in the world. This is one of the biggest stains on our collective consciousness. But guess what? Finally, after months and months of force feeding, somebody decided to stand up and say no. A male nurse told the authorities, I have come to the decision that I refuse to participate in this criminal act. He also told them, before we came here, we were told a different story. The story we were told was completely opposite of what I saw. But I want to give a huge round of applause, totally commend this nurse here. So, awesome job, another victory for humanity. A human being shows that despite what the authorities and the higher ups and the laws may tell you, it doesn't mean that it's right to do these things, and you can still show compassion and be a human being and stop doing these unjust, disgusting acts. Score one for humanity.
So, score one for humanity.
Yes, one for the good guys. And of course, activism is winning around the world right now. That's why we're getting people informed.
And that's what you need to do, is get yourself informed and get out there and participate in our democracy before we lose it completely.
Absolutely. Coming up November the 5th, we're going to have a march against corruption, gathering together people who are suffering from poverty, employment, and just generally getting screwed by a system they didn't vote for.
So activism is winning, and we want you to stand up and be part of the solution instead of sitting back and allowing the problem to continue.
All right, so make sure you stay tuned. We've got more on this coming up.